But so I've heard you talk about unconscious communication. Tell us what that is, and just build on that. Just what is it?
Yeah, so this it's looking at the stories that you're telling yourself.
Okay, just
And
what
I
we're
mean,
talking about here
just
then.
exactly what we're talking about. And so that unconscious communication of what are the stories, what is the meaning that you're making up? Because all meaning is made up in
Yeah,
our own
that's
heads.
exactly the meaning part of it, right?
Yeah.
Why is it a big story in your head?
Yeah. I mean, and it's so often it's a projected story. And when we can look at, okay, well, what am I making? If I were to look at this through the lens of an empowering meaning, if I
Mm-hmm.
were to look at this through the lens of, you know, would my best friend say this to me if I
Mm-hmm.
was in this spot? So
Mm-hmm.
often, as high achieving women, especially, we can be our worst critics. I mean, my
Right.
husband
Oh,
has
totally.
regularly told me I should win an award for being hard on myself. So that being able to be kind and graceful and compassionate and take that third party perspective, because
Mm-hmm.
when you can look at when you're the observer watching the movie of your life and you're seeing that scene play out, just like if you watch a I don't watch horror movies, but if you watched like a scary movie or something like that, where you're like, don't go behind the door, don't go, but don't, and then there's that moment. Well, so often we can actually catch ourselves in those moments before we make the mistake if we just take that third party detached perspective where we're no
Right.
longer beholden to the identity of who we have been.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that really starts to shift. And we can get out of that continuous story, it starts to shift who we are, right?
Mhm.
And then let us be truly who we are versus all the noise that shows up and makes us perceive what we might be, how we might be showing up. But we get to change that way. Hello, my extraordinary women friends. We are starting to count down to the 10th anniversary Extraordinary Women Ignite Conference being held in Golden, Colorado, October 24th through 26th. Mark your calendars. You are going to want to be there. Over the past decade, I have watched hundreds of women transform their businesses and lives through the Extraordinary Women Ignite Conference. When I think of the stories that have unfolded, I couldn't be more proud. Early bird tickets are on sale now for Ignite, and I'll be delivering all my newest Soul Plus strategy teachings for business building with more time prosperity and more wealth prosperity. And the speaker lineup is the bomb.com. You don't want to miss it. It's going to be so good. Imagine walking into a room filled with high vibe women, all ready to share their wisdom and support your journey. Our repeat attendees come back year after year because Ignite is more than just a conference. It's a community of empowered women who believe in making a difference. You can get all the details at camigellner.com/ignite. Today, we are joined by the phenomenal Kimberly Spencer, an award-winning high-performance trauma-informed coach and trainer, Amazon best-selling author, and a captivating TEDx speaker. Kimberly is the powerhouse founder of crownyourself.com and CEO of Communication Queens, where she dedicates her expertise to helping visionary leaders transform their self-limiting stories, build their empires, and fearlessly stand out, creating a business and life that truly rules. A relentless warrior for humans, infinite possibilities, and an unsinkable optimist, Kimberly is on a revolutionary quest to shift mindsets from fear to faith. Her transformative work has been featured across prestigious platforms including Netflix, ESPN, Chicken Soup for the Soul, NPR, Thrive Global, CNBC, and Forbes. In today's conversation, we will dive into the power of unconscious communication and how we can leverage our words to empower the subconscious mind, a crucial tool for entrepreneurs. Kimberly will share how language can create our reality and discuss the mindset needed for enhancing visibility. Plus, we'll explore our shared passion for storytelling and its vital role in branding. Let's meet Kimberly Spencer. Well, welcome to Extraordinary Women Radio, Kimberly. It is great to have you here.
I'm so honored to be here, Cami. I mean, after that event of authentic marketing in the digital age that you put together, it was fire. And so when you invited me, I was like, yes, I am so honored.
Oh, and I'm so glad to finally get you on here. And I think I even sat on on the round table. I'm like, oh, I've had you on the show, and you're like, no, no, you haven't. And I'm like, oh my gosh, we need to get you on, definitely. So, And it's been fun really getting to know you these last couple months, with that event. And now with this, I get to go deeper into your story. So I'm looking forward to this. I have been looking forward to this.
Yeah, same, same. I'm
Yeah.
so honored to be here.
Yeah. Well, I always start with story. And I know that you have made some really important changes in your life that forever changed the trajectory of your life, right? So can you tell a bit of that story and what you learned about yourself along the way?
Yeah, so I've been an entrepreneur since I was 19 years old. When I started offhandedly teaching Pilates in order to support myself in a career in entertainment. And then when I was 24, I had my first my first not my first female, my first film produced, distributed on Lionsgate, picked it up, Netflix picked it up, and then we I was there at the premiere and I was like, I want more than this. And I had been teaching Pilates, freelancing to support myself in my Hollywood dreams. And I realized I was like, I think I want to be the producer, the director, and like the star of my own business,
Hmm.
um, not just have it be just somebody else. Like as a screenwriter, you're more the architect
Uh-huh.
versus the director. And so it was right after that that I got the opportunity to jump on board as a consultant, given my background for with Pilates, to be a consultant for an e-commerce startup and a backstretching device that they were taking to market. And I
Okay.
looked at the device and I said, I see the value. I know who to market to as a Pilates instructor. I know the story of this product. Let me come on board as more than just a consultant. Actually became president of the company,
Hmm.
and we grew that business, scaled it, got it in every major magazine and featured in New York, Times Square billboards. And I pitched the first round of Shark Tank auditions. And then my business partner told me 2 years in that after 2 years, and basically the last year was very cantankerous, like we just did not have a great relationship. The
Hmm.
What I would
Hmm.
say now is the subconscious structure of our business, of understanding
Hmm.
the values, our decision making processes, we were not in alignment.
Right.
And he asked to buy me out. And I went through 3 months of negotiations, dealing with lawyers for the first time in my life, where suddenly I'm being projected on with every fear, every insecurity. All now I know it's to lower my price, but back then I took it so personally, and they brought everything that I thought, um, uh, everything that I had been scared of before, every like too young, too not. I don't have a college degree. All of these beliefs. We ended up signing the buyout agreement 3 weeks before I got married. I jetted off to him on my honeymoon, and I wondered, what do I do when I get back from 6 weeks in Italy? And so my husband and I were brainstorming, as two entrepreneurs do on their honeymoon. And
Oh, your
I
husband's
was,
an entrepreneur too.
yeah, he's been a freelance voice actor for years. He was in real estate investing. Now he's very much, he's my personal chef. He is our farm to table chef now.
Nice.
And yeah, he's always been an entrepreneur spirit. And so we were just brainstorming, and I looked at all these commonalities. Like I'd overcome an eating disorder and hating my body, to now like loving it, and I'd overcome relationship issues to like now finding and manifesting the man of my dreams, and then I'd overcome business struggles, and I love entrepreneurship. And I saw all of these commonalities, and I thought like, and I was in beauty pageants, and I'd always wanted to be a queen. And so I leaped off the couch and I said, crown yourself. And my husband's like, what's that? I said, that's the name of my company. And he's like, what do you do? And I said, I don't know, something like Marie Forleo. And so I immediately then went to work in doing everything that I tell my clients not to do, which is what I call productive procrastination. And I bought all the fancy equipment, and I bought the domain and did the website. And for a year and a half in my business, I made a grand total of $100. And it was
Mm,
because I was too scared, timid, and my mindset had been so polluted with doubt, shame, blame, and complaining from the buyout experience that I didn't know was a positive thing. I thought I'd failed. And as a high
right.
achiever, like feeling like you failed, like that just polluted my mind.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I found out I was pregnant. I realized the person I had become within that year and a half was not the person I wanted to be the mother of my son.
Oh,
And
isn't that interesting? An
yeah,
interesting moment that really helped you shift that.
Yeah. Well, because the title of CEO, I'd had that. I'd had my own
Hmm.
brick and mortar Pilates studio. I'd been president of a company, but the title of mom, that identity, that was
Hmm.
everything. And so I immediately got certified in NLP, timeline therapy, hypnotherapy, because I knew it was a mindset issue and I knew I could overcome it. And I knew I could rewrite my story because I'd already done it with
Yeah.
rewriting my story with bulimia after 10
Yeah.
years of bulimia to get into a point where I freaking love my body. And I'm like, who was that person?
Right.
So I also knew I had a 9-month deadline with, being pregnant. And so I immediately got to work at that. And so after that, I realized and had clarity around my company that it was a coaching company that coaches holistically for high performers and visionary leaders. And
Hmm.
it's evolved over 9 years now. I've got to coach some extraordinary entrepreneurs. And from that, that was how we birthed our second business after getting stuck in Australia, which is our podcast guesting agency as well. So, and
Right.
our podcast guesting agency, Communication Queens, also has the communication theme, the
Right.
queenly reigning theme, because that just is how I identify now.
Yeah. Oh, I
Queen.
love that so much. And it's like really just owning that strength of queen
Yeah.
and crowning yourself and doing that for your clients. I mean, I think that's the beautiful piece of this is like crown yourself as you're going to really put your voice out in bigger ways because so often women pull back and they play small and, like you said, all the mindset stuff that can show up versus just walking into their full strength.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about the archetype of
Hmm.
a queen is born with the expectation that she's going to run a country. Like,
Right.
and if you just like, I mean, as a mother, when I look at my baby and I'm like, just imagine like putting that level of like, oh yeah, your dream is absolutely going to happen. And by the way, this is what's going to happen. Like so often as we are growing up, we are told, oh, that's not realistic. Oh,
Hmm.
that's, well, good luck. Well, once you get security first, or once you get a good financial nest egg, then
Hmm.
go for the thing that you actually want to do. And
Yeah.
that versus that belief that it is a belief of the queen archetype that like you are literally born to do that thing that is
Yeah.
pulling on your soul that you've like always wanted to be when you're about 4, 5, 6 years old.
Hmm.
And while that for me, like queen, that was what I wanted to be. Like it was like queen and entrepreneur. And so I've kind of merged all and storyteller. So I
Right.
was always telling stories and putting on shows in my backyard. And so I get to be all of those things. It's not exactly how I thought it would look when I was 5, but those are my guideposts of who is that person before all the plagiarized programming of the world and society
Hmm.
and former business partners and exes and all that plagued who and clouded my reality of who my identity actually
Right.
is.
So how did you, I mean, what did you learn about yourself through that process?
I learned that ownership is absolutely essential. Like you are going to make some mistakes and the only way you can move is by telling the effing truth about
Hmm.
where you
Hmm. Hmm.
are, who you have been, owning that, honoring that that's where you were.
Hmm.
Also that you're not your behavior.
Yeah.
So you are so much more than what you do.
Yeah.
And that experience of like, okay, that was who I was. That was my behavior for that person. So let me gather some new resources, tools. If I'm owning that I'm the creator of my reality and I created these challenges in my life, then I also can uncreate them and create really great, amazing things in my life. And
Yeah.
so that ownership is essential to create anything new. But it
Yeah.
starts but with seeing life as happening for you, not to you.
Yeah. I so love that. And I love that, um, that ownership helps us move beyond that stuck place, right? I mean, it's like if we don't take ownership of it, we just stay in that stuck place and the stories don't change. Those inner stories don't ever change.
Yeah, I heard the greatest quote from I think it's Layla Hormozy, Alex
Okay.
Hormozy's wife, and she said the easiest way to stay stuck, start tomorrow.
Oh.
Own own what you want tomorrow. Say you'll do it tomorrow. Instead of writing that email, sending that apology, having that conversation today and saying, "Hey,
Yeah.
okay, even
That's
if it's
good.
just with yourself, start
Yeah.
today."
Yeah, that's so good. I love it. So I've heard you talk about unconscious communication. Tell us what that is, and just build on that. Just what is it?
Yeah, so It's looking at the stories that you're telling yourself.
Okay. Just
And
what
I
we're
mean,
talking about here
just
then.
exactly what we're talking about. And so that unconscious communication of what are the stories, what is the meaning that you're making up? Because all meaning is made up in
Yeah,
our own
that's
heads.
exactly the meaning part of it, right?
Yeah.
Why is it a big story in your head?
Yeah. I mean, and it's so often it's a projected story. And when we can look at, okay, well, what am I making? If I were to look at this through the lens of an empowering meaning, if I were
Hmm.
to look at this through the lens of, you know, would my best friend say this to me if I
Hmm.
was in this spot? So
Hmm.
often as high achieving women, especially, we can be our worst critics. I mean, my
Right.
husband
Oh,
has
totally.
regularly told me I should win an award for being hard on myself. So that being able to be kind and graceful and compassionate and take that third party perspective, because
Hmm.
when you can look at when you're the observer watching the movie of your life and you're seeing that scene play out, just like if you watch I don't watch horror movies, but if you watched like a scary movie or something like that, where you're like, don't go behind the door, don't go back, don't. And then there's that moment. Well, so often we can actually catch ourselves in those moments before we make the mistake if we just take that third party detached perspective where we're no
Right.
longer beholden to the identity of who we have been.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and that really starts to shift. And we can get out of that continuous story, it starts to shift who we are, right?
Mhm.
And then let us be truly who we are versus all the noise that shows up and makes us perceive what we might be, how we might be showing up. But we get to change that way.
Yeah. And
So
when you can change that story, then that story actually can become your superpower, both for
yeah,
your own healing and for the healing of others.
right, because it's inspiring. There's an inspiration in that story.
Yeah, there's
Yeah,
actually the emotional vibration of courage because it takes courage to look at your stuff. It
yeah,
takes courage to have an honest conversation with yourself
yeah.
about how you've been treating yourself or how you've been treating your business or how you've been
Hmm.
treating your money or anything that we're in a relationship with in this world.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And, you and I both, we tap into this money, our language is our reality, right? It's like that.
Mhm.
Be careful what words we use because it will stay with us, right? So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, the language that you use, it dictates your reality. I mean, when I used to be bulimic, to give you an example,
Hmm.
I would say horrible things to myself, like, I am fat. I am worthless if I'm not XYZ weight. I would say horrible things. And I look at those language and I completely reject that now because I look at those languages and it wasn't until I started changing the language of how I was speaking about my identity.
Hmm.
And when you look at, and it's just this program running on the back burner. It's like running on RAM space in your mind. So
Right.
when you can look and assess, like, what is the language? What is the language that I'm using with my husband or my children or my business partners or my, I mean, I look at some of the language that I used to use in the past and I was like, wow, everything was from a place of force, of have to versus get
Hmm.
to.
Hmm.
Like, and I
Hmm.
had this I spoke at Oxnard College uh, to their health and fitness department, and I said, How did you get to school today?" And a few of them raised their hand and they're like, "Oh, my mom made me," and I was like, "Okay." I said, did like to be really dramatic? Did she hold a gun to your head?" And they were like, "No. Why would you like no?" And I said, "Okay, so even if in that case, though, even if that was the case, there's still a choice. You may not like the alternative." But one of my favorite quotes is from Viktor Frankl, who is a Holocaust survivor.
Right.
And he said, between stimulus and response, there is a choice. And when we
Hmm.
can start looking consciously at the choices we're making on a daily basis, yes, most of them are unconscious. Yes, most of them are habitual. But when we start evaluating, is this a choice that's moving me toward what I want, or or is it moving me away from something that I don't want?
Right.
And when we can look through that lens, we start to have so much more power over our story. And it takes courage and the true freedom, because most of my clients for Crown Yourself have come to me desiring more freedom in their businesses.
Hmm.
And I look
Hmm.
at how they're thinking of their businesses, and their business has become the ball and chain
Hmm.
for their own freedom. They've tied
Hmm.
themselves to it
Right.
because they're personally attached with their identity into their business, and
Right.
their business makes them who they are. I was just on a phenomenal mastermind call today where we had to introduce ourselves because it was a new mastermind. We had to introduce ourselves without saying what we do, uh, what we work, what our niche is, what our business is. We had to introduce ourselves as who we are. And
Being that true essence of who you are,
yes.
right?
And I saw
Yeah,
so many people, so many of these amazing, talented, successful women grasping at like, well, what do I attach myself to
right.
with, and an interesting thing that I perceived was that people were attaching themselves to like, well, I'm from California or I'm from DC. And so it's like we attach ourselves to a location and to like who we had been. Because when we lose our business, when we lose the identity of that business,
Right.
suddenly who are you without that?
Yeah,
And
it's
that was
interesting. Yeah, I start my mastermind programs with building the essence of who you are. So it's like,
yes.
and then that doesn't mean any roles. It doesn't mean you're a mom or a wife or a sister or a daughter or anything like that. It doesn't mean you're a coach or a consultant. It means who are you at your very essence. And it's looking at, your strengths. It's looking at your passions. It's looking at your values. It's looking at the stories of your lifetime that have shaped you into who you are. And then you roll that into the brand of who you are, and then it becomes very unique. But I love that, you ask that question, because so often we get caught into these boxes, and that's not who we are.
Yeah. Yeah, and
Yeah,
when we can break the box, that's what makes us more interesting,
right,
which makes more people want to be a part of our world because people like to be around people who are doing interesting, cool, fun
right,
things.
totally.
If you're just, here's my one lane business lane, um, and you're only looking to have relationships with people who can grow your business or who can promote your business, then
Hmm.
you're not actually looking at the holistic picture of like
Yeah,
all of the different facets of who you are and
yeah,
the value that you inherently provide to the world just by being fully you.
yeah. And bringing your stories to life, right? I mean, and I know
Yes.
you're passionate about this, is how our stories can really shape, how people perceive us, how they receive us, how they connect with us, how they resonate with us. I mean, it's all those things that story can really bring to the forefront.
Yep.
Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I mean, the stories that we have, like I like to say that in my coaching company, we work on the internal stories. And then in our
Hmm.
podcast guesting agency, we leverage people's stories that are healed. Mind you, you don't
Yes,
want to be
and they have
sharing
to be healed,
they have
right?
to be healed. You don't want to share an
Yes.
unhealed story on a podcast. Save that for therapy. That leverage the story for a wider audience because your
Yes.
story is that testimony of everything you've been through that shapes how we think.
Right.
Stories actually, when I was in a mastermind where the president of, I think it was Singularity University, he was speaking and he opened up his talk by saying, "Can I tell you a story?" And just that phrase, "Can I tell you a story?" It actually converts a little bit of oxytocin in your brain.
Hmm.
It converts short-term memory into long-term memory because
Mm,
we are biologically hardwired for story.
that's
And so
interesting.
when we can learn how to tell our story as the example of an embodied version of, not saying that you are the be all and end all or a guru, but more
Hmm.
as the muse, the visionary who's leading and paving the way for more women to be uplifted behind you, because somebody's going to resonate with my story that they may not resonate with
Yeah.
somebody else's, and
Yeah.
somebody might not resonate with another person's. I had this conversation with one of my clients who was like, "Kim, we basically do the same thing. Why what?" And she was starting her business, so she was new and a little nervous, and I said, "Well," I said, "you can, I mean, I'll always take a referral." But the the power that's in your story, you have a background and a history that I don't have. She'd
Yeah.
spent 30 years in medical training as a
Yeah.
nurse. And I said,
Yeah.
there will be people who value your education and your background in the medical field, that they see some, sparkly college dropout and they're like, I don't think I need to work with her. But they'll see you and they want to work with you. And so I get to refer those people to you. And you get to refer the ones who want a different level of sparkle or joy and strategy with their performance to me. And like
Right.
that's we offer, and that's the value of our story because we like who we like.
Right.
And
Right.
that's why I have full belief in like abundance, because there's more than enough clients,
Totally.
business, money,
Yeah.
people to go around. It's just the stories that we're telling ourselves.
Yeah.
So when
Yeah.
you can look at your story and see does it serve? How is your story that beacon for calling people in? I've had people who have been achieved far more in business than I have want to work with me simply because of my stories exhibit the deep-seated values of ownership and authenticity.
Yeah.
And they're like,
Yeah.
I would like more freedom and more ownership of my life and more authenticity and to feel more self-expressed. Great.
Yeah.
That's it. And that's the power of your story. So when you can look
Yeah.
at your story and see what is the story that's going on in your head, what is the story about your story? Because I've heard that one too with
Mm-hmm.
with people who are like, oh, I don't know my story. Who could resonate with my story? I had this conversation with a client the other day where she was like, I'm a single mom, like struggling financially, like who could resonate with my story? And I was
Like a
like
lot of single moms
like
struggling
a
with
lot of
all.
single moms struggling with their story,
Totally.
struggling with owning their worth and their value. Like
Yeah.
they won't resonate with me. I'm not a single mom.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Like that, I'm like, this is why you need to be out there.
Yeah.
So there is power in looking at what is the value. And so there's an exercise that I love to do. And I invite your listeners to do this, where you look at everything that you've been through, every mastermind, every coach that you've worked with, and you just start to write down the dollar amount. You just, write it down, take about 10 minutes, think of everything that you've invested in, every book. If like, oh my gosh, my Amazon,
Yeah, it would be.
that'd be
That would add up
enormous.
pretty quick.
But being able to look at all of those investments that you've made into yourself and then be able to look at how much money have you made over the course of your lifetime, learning your skill set, learning your career,
Right.
and then also write down those numbers of how much money over the course of your lifetime have you made.
Right.
And if we were to just be super trite and just put a dollar amount to all the experiences that you've ever had. And yes, there are some of those experiences that are like horrific that you would never want to put a dollar amount to. And I completely honor and respect those. But if you did, like what was the therapy bill for those? And you wrote that down too. And then you just add it up. I've never had a client or any person in any training get less than $1 million. And that's the power, like that's the bare ass minimum without going through all your tax returns from decades of, of your story of looking at what that value is. And thus when you get invited onto a podcast or onto a stage or to have a conversation with someone, owning that value, it's kind of like how a queen has, the GDP, and that's like the value of the country. And so this is your GDP that you are putting out into the world.
That's awesome. I love it. And it's, you know, what we learn and how we grow as, each time, each one of those investments took you to another space. And each one of those experiences took you to another space. And you start to mix all of those together. And that's what really makes you unique.
Yeah.
And that's where you go right back to there's no competition when you are really just truly being you, because there's no one just like you.
100%.
Yeah. Yeah. So good. So good. The one of the things that I think of is like when women are getting visible, all the mindset games that can kind of show up for them. And and it's so important to to notice what's there, to see what are those stories that we're telling ourselves. There's these inner stories you're talking about, right? And then we start to move into this space of we get more comfortable, we find our confidence, we're walking out, and we're really bringing our message up, but we can still be in that projecting stage, right? We can still be projecting our message. And then when we get into that next phase where it's really about embodied messaging, like we're embodying what we stand for, what we know about our own truths, we are embodying how we show up. That's where we can really become movement makers. What are some of the ways that we can move through the mindset challenges that you've seen over the years?
Cami, first of all, I have to commend you for the phraseology of movement makers. Like
Mm.
that term, it just
It
resonates
resonates,
and just
right? It resonates for me too.
yeah, it has momentum behind it.
Right.
And that stage of seeing the momentum and there is the hill of visibility because,
Mhm.
and I did not expect this because I was like, okay, I've coached people through their stories and we've worked on their subconscious, blocks and stuff through my coaching business. And then when we have our podcast guesting agency, I was like, all of our clients will have their story down. Like they're not going to be concerned about the visibility. Oh no. Some of the feedback that we've had from our clients and our agency were like, I am finally feeling like I can be fully seen.
Mm.
And I'm like, you didn't feel that before? You built a really successful business.
Right.
But that's the power of visibility and getting your message out
Yeah.
to the world, whether it's on podcasts or social media or YouTube or all the places. And it comes from showing up with courage. And there is a lot of courage that comes with stripping away of the illusions of all the shoulds that have been thrown upon you and showing up fully as you are. And it does take courage.
It
And
does. Yeah.
courage is a vibration. And
Mhm.
so if we're looking strictly at the energetics of like what Dr. David Hawkins calls the map of consciousness, and we look at the vibration of courage, it actually is this beautiful tipping point that moves people. It creates movement. And that's why podcast guesting can convert so great for business revenue. I mean, from podcast guesting, that was what started our agency, was we did over $250,000 from just podcast guesting alone in new business. When you share your story courageously, it tips people into a space of movement. Whereas
Yeah.
if there's still anger attached, which is a lower
Right.
consciousness,
It's
it
lower
agitates.
vibration.
Yeah, it's a lower vibration. It agitates. So you can get some people wanting to come into your world, but
Mhm.
you may also get some friction of the haters.
Yeah.
Versus then you have pride. And this is where I've seen a lot of successful CEOs get tripped up when they start getting more visible,
Mhm.
because they focus only on the highlight reel of their accomplishments
Mhm.
versus really sharing the vulnerability spots
Right.
of their story, of like
Yeah.
those pitfalls.
I've always have been, it's like, if you're coming on my podcast, you got to share the vulnerable parts of your journey, because nobody wants to hear the highlights. They want to hear the journey.
Yeah. Yeah. And because the journey is what's relatable. Because for the
Right.
person, the business owner who's like, got 2 weeks left of payroll before they're like, I don't know what I'm going to do,
Mhm.
knowing that there's another business owner out there sharing that story,
Right.
that suddenly creates resonance where they're like, oh, I'm not alone. I remember
Right.
when I had that conversation with my mom a few years ago, because my parents were entrepreneurs. And I was like, Mom, I don't know what I'm going to do. I have 2 weeks left of payroll left. And she goes, oh, there were some times that we only had 2 days. You're doing great.
And you're like, oh, okay.
Oh, okay.
Right.
But that's the power and the perspective shift too.
Right.
So when you're
Right.
able to share those vulnerable pieces and then show, hey, I got out alive, my business is still thriving, we're doing great. Like and let me give you the strategy and the system and the guidance.
Mhm.
What being in those visibility spots does, it also positions you as the mentor, the guide, the Yoda.
Yeah.
And yes, there will be people that let's address the topic of haters for a hot second, because there will be people there. And haters can be some of your greatest assets to looking at your future perspective, not maybe right now, but like 5 years down the road, once they have some mindset shifts to get to the point to want to like be in a space to work with you. But to the actual objections of people that could be hindering their actual progress. And so if the
Mhm.
overarching mission is like to up level consciousness or to generate more wealth for women, then looking at, okay, well, this person, this hater just left a comment on my Instagram about how, oh, it must be nice for you, coming from all of this, coming from an entrepreneur background. And I'm like, yeah. And I remember when, there were days that my parents couldn't pay for certain things and they had to ask my grandma for money for my school. And like, there were challenges, but also looking at, wow, that's a common objection that's preventing people from actually moving beyond. And
Right.
these objections that people can give you. And I'm not saying respond to every single one of them, but I'm saying look at how you can turn each of these into teaching points.
Good.
And like one of our clients, Megan Camille, did a phenomenal job doing this when she was posted a reel that she shared about on her recent summit called The Game of Business and How to Win It. And it was basically like, oh, you have a low social media account. Like, how can you be a multimillionaire? And she was like, you obviously don't know much about business.
Because we don't need all those numbers. We don't need to be
Popularity.
influencers to have a successful business.
Yeah. And as she
Right.
says, popularity doesn't equal profitability.
Right. Right.
And when you get, and so that allowed her to give this teaching point of, oh, this must be a belief system that is impacting people
Right.
from actually moving forward and creating their business, because they think, I don't have high enough social media numbers, I'm not influential enough
Yeah.
to have to be able to make an impact. So
Yeah.
if you can look at every single one of those as a teacher and an opportunity, same with podcast interviews. Well, podcast interviews, I've never really had anyone get like direct feedback of like, oh, you're wrong. Like, because typically podcast interviews can be, you're especially when, like, for us, we focus on like going on podcasts that your ideal customer avatar is either listening to or subscribing to, or that build your authority in that niche and in that area.
Right. Right.
So, but I have had some clients who in the past have gone on podcasts that we could say, in a good, bad, right, wrong binary world, that it was wrong for their business. And in that space, being able to look at, okay, well, how did you navigate around that question? Like, how could you then vet so that you're not going on a podcast where the audience is a mismatch? Like, one of my friends went on a podcast where they asked her like 5 times, like, do you believe so a woman's place is in the home? And she's like, I run a $25 million company.
Yeah. Right.
From my home, but like, no,
Yeah.
like, you're kind of asking the wrong person. And so being able to say, okay, well, I navigated that. I got to practice graceful communication, being able to divert, being able to, like, what I call talk like a politician, where you kind of get to subvert around the question, and you get to navigate that and do the dance and say, okay, this person's obviously not a fit. Like, we're probably not going to get a lot of clicks or generate business from this episode, but this did teach me something. And when you can look at every one of those visibility opportunities as like, what is this teaching me? It goes back to, is life happening to you or for you? And when you can see it from, what is it teaching me? How did this happen for me and for my highest and best? Then it allows you to radically transform and feel much more confident with every next stage of visibility. Like, if I went back and looked at my podcast from even just my guest interviews from like 3 years ago, I'm like, ooh, yeah, there's some things that could have improved on my communication, but it comes with practice.
It does. And that's one thing I love about guest podcasting is it just, you get deep into your messaging, just you get so good at the stories, the conversations, the leading what your message is. And that's one of the things I've loved about guest podcasting over the years. So, and I think I've probably been on close to 100 guested on close to 100 shows over the years. And that definitely has shaped how I talk about my business. And I think that's one of the beauties of guest podcasting.
Yeah, I never would have been able to do my TED Talk had it not been for doing 150 interviews within the span of 2020 and 2021. Because I had 3 weeks to prepare for my TED Talk. That was it. But I knew my message because I had in real time the practice and the reps of sharing that message. And so to get over that visibility hump, it's just making the choice and the decision to get visible, and then to allow for whatever shows up in those moments, to face those moments with courage, whether it's a hater or, more often, honestly, you're going to get positive feedback. More often than not. There's these elusive haters that we sometimes worry about. I find they don't rear their head as much as we think they do. In fact, probably they're only about 10% of the people, and then they kind of hop off and leave and run away.
Yeah, so good. So where can people learn more about you and your businesses, so both of them?
Yeah. So if you love this conversation and you want to accelerate your high performance for building your own empire, then head on over to crownyourself.com/podcast and subscribe to the Crown Yourself podcast. And if you love this conversation or are like, ooh, what's this podcast guesting thing? And how can I share more of my story? Then head on over to communicationqueens.com/podcast and listen to the Communication Queen podcast.
Excellent. So good. And the final question I always close with are, what are 3 pearls of wisdom you'd like to leave with us today?
Ooh, such a good question, Cami. So first one is ownership always. And
Mhm.
ownership does come with owning your
Mhm.
and that is the number one, first and foremost. Second, lead with generosity.
I love that.
Karma is the law of cause and effect. And
Okay.
so lead with that first, give generously, support people generously, and you will see it return 10x.
Nice.
And thirdly, look at everything in life between your business, your life, your body, all the things as a relationship.
Yeah.
And if you personify that relationship, is that a relationship that you really enjoy being in? Or is there a discrimination between, like, one feels like it's taking rather than giving? So, and I've seen this a lot with business owners where they're putting so much of their time giving into the relationship and their business really isn't giving much profit back. And so then it comes down to looking at that relationship and how can you reevaluate and restructure that relationship so that it's of mutual trust and support.
So good. So good. Kimberly, this has been so much fun. Thank you for joining me and sharing all your good wisdom.
Thank you so much, Cami. It has been a pleasure, and I'm so excited to have served your audience.
Oh, I'm sure they're going to love it.